community. So, Joanna, please take it away.
Thank you, Molly, and thank you all for having me here tonight and for the invitation to speak with you all about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, bird conservation, and also ways to reduce light pollution for bird conservation, but also for people and other wildlife. So I am also a local. I live in Calvert County. And I imagine, some of you all probably had a long work day like myself. And I'd like to hear from you a little bit in the chat, if you don't mind, sharing a recent bird sighting that you are excited about. And what community in Maryland do you call home? If you don't mind dropping that in the chat, you don't have to. Just later on, I would love to see that chat and hear from you all about these things. And I can just share today. I took a short walk in my yard and I really enjoyed watching some female towhees foraging around in the shrubs. So I love the male towhees, but the females always just really capture my heart. They're just really beautiful. And like I said, I live in Northern Calvert County in Owings, and I've been here for about 9 years with my family, and I love it, and I do consider it home now. So just to move into my presentation, I do work for the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Migratory Bird Program. And so the mission of the Fish and Wildlife Service is to work with others to conserve wildlife. And the Migratory Bird Program is responsible for implementing several landmark conservation laws for the protection of native bird species. We are responsible for sustaining over 1,100 native species in the US wherever they occur. And we also work internationally with partners to sustain these species across their full annual cycle. And we accomplish this conservation with a lot of partners. We try to be innovative in our partnerships, and all of these partnerships are geared towards either protecting the habitats that these birds rely on or reducing human-made threats on the landscape and promoting awareness to the American people about the value of birds. Speaking of which, I'm sure that many of you know about the value of birds, their intrinsic value, that they're pollinators, they are seed dispersers, they are cycling nutrients and important parts of our healthy ecosystems, and they contribute an incredible amount of biodiversity. But they're also important economically. The Fish and Wildlife Service conducts a survey, the National Hunting Recreation Survey. I'm missing a word in there. And we released this in 2022. And just a few weeks ago, we released an addendum to this survey that is about bird watching in the US. And we highlight in this that over 90 million people in the US consider themselves bird watchers. And over 90% of those people are watching birds from their homes, in their yards, and in their communities. And they are also contributing about $280 billion to the economy each year. So birds are important to the American people. They bring us a lot of joy. They improve our well-being, and they also are a big part of our economy. I also want to talk with you all about the value of the night sky tonight and why it's worth preserving. So the night sky, until about 100 years ago, was only naturally bright from the stars and the moon. And even today, with the amount of light pollution that we have, it still is an important part of our society, of our culture, inspiring creativity, and it connects us all across time and space. It's also really important ecologically. The natural cycles of night and day create circadian rhythms that support healthy, natural ecological functioning. So preserving the night sky is also preserving our ecosystems. And something else I would love to hear from you in the chat is, if you don't mind sharing, what is your favorite memory of looking at the stars? And I like to ask this question because while we are talking about an issue tonight that is affecting the night sky, it's really connecting with the the pristine night sky that inspires us, that's going to motivate us to want to save the dark sky and motivate action and momentum to reduce light pollution. So I can't see the chat, but I think you all can if you have it open, and so you can share among yourselves. Just a favorite memory. And one thing about living in Southern Maryland that I love is that we're bordered by a lot of big open water, and there's not a lot of light pollution, on the surface of the water, except for maybe some vessels and a little bit of infrastructure. And so I feel like our night skies are actually pretty bright here. And I know some people who do astrophotography here in the county and have taken really stunning photos. So certainly we are set up to do well in Southern Maryland to reduce light pollution and have even brighter skies. So pivoting to talking about birds and night skies, worldwide there are about 10,000 species of birds, and about 19% of those are migratory. And then when we look at North America, that number rises up to about 70% of our species migrate, and of those, about 80% migrate at night. This equates to about 400 or more species of birds. And when it becomes dusk, these birds orient themselves for their nighttime migration using polarized light, the magnetic field, cues on the landscape, such as mountains and coastlines, and also they rely on favorable weather to help orient themselves. And this truly is an incredible, magnificent feat that they undertake. It's awe-inspiring. I never get tired of thinking about these birds and their journeys, flying all night, doing what must be multiple marathons, sometimes in a single night, and some continue for days. So this is a spectacle of nature. And I think it was David Sibley who said that if we could see this in the daytime, it would be the most inspiring movement of animals anywhere on the planet. But it's happening while we're sleeping, which is also when these birds are being affected by nighttime lighting. Hopefully all of you are familiar with Birdcast. If you're not, I encourage you to visit this site. You can sign up for alerts to let you know when there's going to be a large movement of bird migration in the area. It's incredible that birds can migrate in such high densities that they're detected by weather radar. And then that data can be extracted and modeled into predictive technologies like Birdcast to predict when and where birds are going to be moving during migration. So this is just the snapshot that I took from a night in September last fall, where they predicted over 300 million birds would be migrating that night. And if you are a night owl, you can also stay up and you can watch migration happening in real time on this site. So they will actually extract the information from the weather radar real time, and you can see the birds accumulate at dusk, move through the night, and then start to land in the morning. And this is a result of a collaboration with Cornell, University of Massachusetts, and Colorado State University. So just an incredible, powerful tool, helps inform our Lights Out campaigns around the country that Audubon's a leader on. So definitely want to give a nod to Audubon on that. But also it's something we can use at home. So throughout history, since birds have evolved to migrate, they have largely followed pretty predictable patterns known as migratory flyways between their breeding and non-breeding grounds. And this map here just shows what the major flyways are between North and South America. And they used to migrate with a dark sky that was only illuminated by the stars and the moon. So now that has changed. So in the past 100 years, light pollution has increased rapidly on the landscape. It's increasing about 10% a year. And it's now estimated that 80% of people on the planet live under a lit sky. So we can no longer step outside and see that pristine night sky or easily see the Milky Way. That's becoming rarer and rarer. And also birds, they were once migrating over a dark landscape, and now they're migrating over this brightly lit areas. And so what that is doing is that is affecting them by, we don't know the biological mechanisms for sure as to what is happening internally in the birds when they're exposed to light pollution. But we do know that it is affecting them. It disorients them and it attracts them into the lit areas. And so at a large scale or a macro scale, they are getting pulled away from their historical migratory pathways and drawn to areas that have a lot of light. And these are our urban and suburban areas. And some of these urban and suburban areas are in really important flyways, like around the Great Lakes, for example. And then once the birds are starting to be drawn from their migration, it continues to escalate. So they will wind up in these urban areas, and then as they get closer and closer to lit structures, they will begin to circle a building or a tower, especially those that are brightly lit. And they become what's called entrapped. So they can't escape this light either. So they'll circle, they'll become exhausted, they'll often collide with each other in the air, they may collide with the building. And this can lead to an incredible amount of mortality. And an extreme example of this is the Tribute in Light in New York City. So this is a very important event every year to honor the victims of 9/11. These bright beams are shown on, around on September 11th, which also overlaps with peak fall migration. And so when the beams are on and birds are moving through the area, they can get entrapped, like I just described. And so these are these specks and these beams are actually hundreds, probably thousands of birds. And when the beams are off, this center blue square here in the top, it shows that birds were relatively spread out across the area of Manhattan. But then when the lights are turned on, as you can see in this bottom blue square, almost immediately thousands of birds can be drawn in. So the New York City Bird Alliance, formerly the New York City Audubon, they partner with this tribute now, and they have volunteers out there watching the beams. And when the bird numbers increase, they shut the beams off for about 15 to 20 minutes, and that is enough time to release those birds from that entrapment experience. And so they're able to reorient themselves and continue on their way. And they also provide reports of the results of birds leaving the area. And so the bird collisions have drastically reduced through the night and into the morning since they've been doing this. So this is a great example of a way that we can still have the light that people are wanting to use, that we can take steps to do it more responsibly and not have these unintentional consequences for birds. So once birds are in these urban areas and are becoming exhausted from being drawn into the light pollution, they may persist on in the area in the morning. And if they're in a city or in a suburb, they are looking for cover. And then they are exposed to other human threats. Building glass is a huge one. It's an invisible barrier to birds. I imagine you've heard about this. Maybe you've also experienced thuds on your own windows where birds have not been able to see your window and have hit it. And so we have incidents like this, the McCormick Place, which is in Chicago. For 40 years, birds have been hitting that conference center. It's been monitored for that long. And in the fall of 2023, there was a mass mortality event where about 1,000 birds died. They were drawn into the convention center. It was a low cloud ceiling night. It was there was a lot of migration and there was a lot of glass. And so the combination of those effects led to this mass mortality event that hit a lot of news outlets. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, with some other partners, met with those who managed the McCormick Place. And since then, they've treated those windows. They're also closing blinds at night. And this past fall, the monitoring showed a drastic, significant reduction in bird mortality around the facility. So what is the impact to birds? We know that building collisions cause about 1 billion bird deaths per year. And even when birds fly away, unfortunately, a lot of those birds are also perishing later from what studies have shown. And while cities are contributing a lot to light pollution, the high rises are not actually the primary source of bird collisions. We are mostly seeing these bird collisions happening at the low rise buildings and at our own homes. And it also happens offshore. Something that I'm working on a lot at the service right now is offshore light pollution from vessels like cruise ships and oil and gas platforms. So lighting offshore can, even if it's just a single vessel, if it's an otherwise dark environment, the light can be seen several miles away and still draw migrating birds into it and cause fallouts on these ships and their decks. So this video here shows the beginning of a fallout at a cruise ship. This was taken in the fall of 2022 just by a passenger on the cruise ship. So hopefully none of you have experienced this. I understand it's exciting to, get to see something like this, but knowing that these birds are attempting to cross like an ocean environment that can be quite harsh for them and that they're getting drawn into the light it's a very energy intensive detour for them that unfortunately can lead to a lot of mortality. So we learned that there's some, every fall we're learning there are big events like this with cruise lines. And so thankfully, there's been multiple cruise lines that have shown interest in working with us to try out different approaches on, trying to address this issue. And it's not only migration. So we see big impacts during migration, but it's really across the entire year that light pollution is having effects on birds. And I'm going to talk about non-birds too. And one example is seabirds. So there are seabird colonies on U.S. islands. And when the young birds go to take their first flights, they unfortunately can also get drawn into the lighting of ships, but also roadways with street lighting can cause these birds to get disoriented and grounded. And unfortunately, once they're grounded, it is very hard for them to take flight again without help. And they can get hit by cars or depredated by cats. And so there are efforts, particularly in Hawaii, to try to reduce lighting on cruises around sensitive bird areas with colony nesting seabirds and also along coastal highways. And lighting does affect other wildlife. So I mentioned the offshore vessels, but also coastal areas, which we have a lot of here in Maryland. The lighting also goes into, the offshore environment nearby, and it affects the water column. And pretty much every taxa that has been studied from macroinvertebrates, up to, I've been talking about birds, are showing effects to lighting. And so in our water environments, it affects how animals are spread through the water column. It can be so bright that it's causing things like coral to spawn when historically they were triggered by cycles of the moon. And it's also affecting all of our insects. Insects are being drawn in to lighting and affecting their predator-prey relationships. And we're experiencing massive insect declines as well. And light pollution is certainly not helping them. So we also have an effort at the service to increase awareness about the effects of lighting on all wildlife and to try to dim lights for them as well. And we shouldn't forget the effects on us. So humans, as much as we like to light up our environment at night, we may not realize how much it is affecting us. Studies have found that it is disrupting our circadian rhythms, particularly people who are exposed to light all night. When their circadian rhythms are affected, it can contribute to certain cancers. A lot of lighting is not done thoughtfully. It's done to make an area brighter without thinking about the glare that it can be creating for pedestrians or for drivers, and how that actually reduces the visibility of an area. And this may make us feel safer, but because of the glare and that reduced visibility, it's actually giving us a false sense of security. It can also create areas that have a lot of shadows, where, not to scare anybody, but it's creating dark areas where there could be things that you're unable to see until you're right up on them. So certainly we could be doing a better job just to even help ourselves with how we are lighting our environment at night. So back to the birds, how does all of this factor into our broader bird conservation needs and goals? So there was a paper about 5 years ago that documented what many of us suspected, that bird populations had declined. And it turns out they had declined quite a bit. About 3 billion birds have disappeared from our landscape in just 50 years, just like the course of a lifetime. And so this is about nearly a 30% drop in our bird populations. And a lot of the species that were in the study are still declining. The thing is that we do know what to do to bring these birds back. It's to recover them, we need to conserve their habitats, and we need to reduce their threats. So 1 billion birds a year lost to bird collisions with buildings are certainly avoidable. And if we can take action at a landscape scale to reduce that threat, then we're going to seriously recover a lot of these birds that we have lost over the past 50 years. And building collisions are a big one. So they are one of the two largest threats to birds, the anthropogenic threats to birds, so human-caused mortality. The other leading cause is cats. That's not here. So if we can work on our buildings and make our glass more visible and reduce our light pollution, we will be reducing one of those major threats to birds. And we do have reason for hope. So in that same amount of time, we took action. We did what we needed to do, and we worked together, and we recovered several species of raptors and waterfowl. We made the right investments in the right places, and we reduced the right threats, such as reducing pesticides that then raptor eggs. We saved wetlands so that waterfowl and water birds could improve, and we were successful. So while we've lost some groups of birds, other groups of birds have recovered and are doing really well. So we can do this again. We have the right tools, and now we just have to do it. And we can implement solutions at different scales. So at those same scales that we have the problem, we can also flip that into a solution. So we could be thinking about reducing our light pollution at a flyway scale to preserve that flyway during migration. We can work at a city or a small town scale, and we can work at an individual building scale as well. Whatever one we work at is going to be an improvement, and it is going to make a difference, and it is going to help our birds. Back to the McCormick Place, just an example of local scale effects, that treating a single building's windows is saving thousands of birds a year. And the building was also studied to look at the effect of turning off even half of the building's lights a night during migration, and that reduced bird collisions by 50%. So even at an individual building level, if we reduce lighting and make the glass more visible, we are going to be helping birds that way. And there are probably buildings in Southern Maryland in our area that are contributing a lot to bird collisions, and we just may not know which ones or where they are. So what can we do? When it comes to lighting, the solutions are to really keep the lighting when and where we need it. So we can turn lights off. That's the quick and easy one. We can downshield our lights. we can avoid blue and white light by using warmer colors. And we can also move lights closer to the ground. We can reduce our interior light spilling into the environment by closing blinds and shades. Now, with a lot of municipalities wanting to change their lighting, such as to LED lighting, we have an opportunity to do networked lighting through a community so that way it can be dimmed or even turned off at certain times of night by a network, which is going to save energy as well. And you can also get creative. So in natural areas, you can avoid nighttime lighting altogether and use lighter colored surfaces such as sidewalks and paths that can be visible once your eyes have adjusted to the darkness. And really important for lighting is to work it into the planning. So if you have a retrofit coming up or a new build, is to be thinking about the lighting as early as possible and talking with the experts about lighting and letting them know, what your needs and wants are to reduce light pollution. And there are some experts out there and organizations that have a lot of resources available who are lighting engineers and lighting designers and know about the issue of light pollution and are promoting awareness and have solutions. So two big ones are the Design Light Consortium. They have a program called Luna. And thankfully, I get to work with the Luna director regularly, Leora Radetsky. She's a phenomenal resource. And she has developed with colleagues the 7 strategies to minimize negative impacts of light at night. And so you can visit their website. They have these 7 strategies that you can refer to if you are able to work on lighting in your community. And also, they have identified a series of products that meet certain requirements. So if you're looking actually for specific products that you can recommend to a building or to a community that avoid light pollution, DLC's Luna program has those. The other is Dark Sky International. So they are known worldwide for promoting awareness around preserving our night skies. And they work with the Illumination Engineering Society that produces standards for lighting that are used worldwide. So those 2 organizations have worked together to develop these 5 lighting principles. And it really comes to ensuring that you're really only using light when and where you need it. And again, these lighting controls to be able to use light that's dimmable and can be easily turned off are really important in avoiding that blue and white light. And so the great thing about working on light pollution is that it has a lot of immediate benefits. As soon as you flip the light, that is gone from the environment. There aren't many contaminants out there or environmental problems where literally with the flip of a switch, you can eliminate that problem. This is something that anyone can do at their home, and it does save money to address light pollution. It has the benefit of making our skies at night more visible for the enjoyment of us all. And it's also going to help preserve not only our natural circadian rhythms, but those in the environment around us. And what about glass? There are a lot of simple, affordable options for treating glass. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can get creative with tempera paint if you would like to, or you can also get a little more sophisticated with products, window films like Dots and Stripes. Feather Friendly is a company that a lot of people will purchase from to either get stripes or dots to put on their windows. The important thing is that you need the markers to be no more than 2 inches apart, either direction. We used to say 2 by 4, but then we learned that hummingbirds were not seeing those markers as well as if the markers were no more than 2 inches apart. So that's the rule of thumb now, no more than 2 inches apart, either dots or stripes. Other things you can do is just really cheap is soap, or don't even clean your windows. Just let them get gummed up. Screens that come with windows, those work. One thing that we tried for a while at our house was to move the screen to the middle of the window. And it was pretty effective, except for, at times when we had a lot of cedar waxwings foraging right outside, and then we would hear the thuds. And so now we've treated those windows with the dots and have not had any thuds since then. So just have to be really thoughtful with the screens. And then your more expensive options are going to be that acid etching or fritting of windows. That is really effective. And especially when you're thinking about the first 100 or so feet of a building, so it doesn't have to be the entire building that needs the etching and fritting. And if you incorporate it again in that early planning or any retrofitting or construction, typically the cost does not seem as daunting when you take it into the whole scheme of a project. And one thing you can do at home or wherever you work, or if any buildings that you frequent, is to figure out which windows are actually the problem windows. That's another thing, is that we're not talking about necessarily having to treat all of your windows, just those big offenders. So we do have some surveys, and I think you might be able to find one online as well if you do an online search, is to just take the time over, a couple of weeks and at different seasons of the year to listen, go around your house or your building, see if there are birds that are hitting particular windows, and then prioritize those for treatment. Of course, if you treat them all, you're going to be solid, but sometimes that's not the easiest thing to do. And just treating those windows that are known problems are going to fix this issue as well. And again, just keep thinking about planning. So we're always hammering that in at the service as well. We have actually surveyed over 90% of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services buildings, and now we are slowly retrofitting and incorporating into new builds bird safe glass and reduced lighting across the Fish and Wildlife Service. And this here just shows a bird-friendly building that was built on the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge outside of Albuquerque, with fritted glass and reduced lighting at night. And so how are we going to do this? How are we going to save a billion birds? And I'm just going to check on the time. Okay, I think I'm doing okay on time. I just have a few more slides. And it is going to take all of us working together. This is a human-caused issue, and it does have a human solution. So one thing I do want to share is that we are seeing a lot of momentum around this issue. Pretty much every sector that can influence adopting solutions at scale is now engaged. We have several government agencies engaged, several industries, nonprofits, community groups, pretty much at every scale. We are seeing interest because I think people are realizing that this is an unintended consequence on the landscape that's fixable, and there are simple solutions, and we just need to do it. We are seeing some very successful strategic partnerships. I mentioned already Dark Sky International, the Illuminating Engineering Society, and the Design Light Consortium Luna. So these have experts at the table who know how to design lighting and to implement it at market level scales. And they are seeing a lot of success. We are seeing the early adopters now moving into the next level of companies and cities wanting to try out these network controls, invest in those, and taking the steps to make their communities dark sky friendly. And at the service, over the last year, we have launched a partnership. It was a year ago this week that we had a summit at our National Conservation Training Center over in West Virginia, where we brought in groups from every sector, and we talked about the bird effects, other wildlife, human effects, and also solutions. And over the past year, we have um, just garnered more and more interest in this partnership. There's over 400 people that have joined this now. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me. We meet about as a big group about once every 6 weeks, and we have working groups that are focused on architecture and glass, lighting specifically, the coastal and offshore lighting. And so each group has identified a set of goals and are making a lot of progress. And so that's where I'm getting a lot of the cruise ship work done, actually, is we have this great network of experts that are really motivated and connected in the industry. So we're really excited about the progress we're making with this. And engaging campaigns. So getting people inspired and in all the right outlets as well is also garnering a lot of interest in this issue. So you probably, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, are seeing posts about the birdcast alerts. World Migratory Bird Day is a landmark effort every year to bring attention to migratory birds and the issues facing them. And this year's theme is shared spaces, creating bird-friendly cities and communities. And you should be able to see it. It's blocked for me right now, but there's a window in here that it shows a cat inside behind the window. So cats indoors, but also shows that the window's treated with dots. So there's other solutions that are scattered through this as well. And a few years ago, World Migratory Bird Day promoted lights out for birds. We're getting celebrities like Jane Alexander speaking about this. And we are seeing that cities and communities are leading the way for making those areas safer for birds. So action at any level is going to make a difference, including at your home and in your communities. And just my final slide here is a call to action. I hope that there's been something that you can take away from this, that there are potentially some actions that you could take at home or in your community. And also, I would just love to hear if you have what you need to take those steps, where at whatever level you are able to take them for birds and for all of our wildlife. So thank you all very much. That concludes my presentation. And if we have time, I can take some questions and just would love to hear your all's thoughts on this issue as well.
Joanna, thank you so much. This was an amazing presentation, and I think you can tell by the 53 people we had tuning in that it's an issue that people really care about now. So folks, if y'all have questions, you could either put them in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. And while we're letting you get your thoughts together, I do have a question for you, Joanna. So some of our public buildings here are very interested in retrofitting their windows or putting up dots or Acopian lines to help the bird strikes. But the problem is, of course, they have no money. Do you know of grant programs out there that organizations or library, public buildings like libraries could apply to get funding to help do this?
That's a great question. The funding issue is one that does often come up. And right now, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we are investing in retrofitting our own buildings. And then as far as other opportunities, I'm just thinking right now that like the American Zoological Association, they have a grant program for their facilities. So if there are any facilities in Maryland that are members of AZA, they could apply there. At a national scale, aside from sourcing that within organizations like nonprofits, if they're able to commit those funds or leverage funds. Unfortunately, right now, I do not know of a national program that I could recommend. I will say that I'm always surprised how much people want to engage on this issue and contribute. And on a personal level, I was able to get a local community building to incorporate dots into their planning. And so they were able to treat their windows before the project was complete and actually work that into their funding plan. So sometimes reaching out, when the fiscal, the funding cycles are turning over, any leftover funds that need to be spent at the end of a fiscal year sometimes can be a great timing and a great resource.
Great, thank you. And there's a question in our chat box. I don't know if specifically falls under your bailiwick, but they're asking what kind of plans are in place to promote Migratory Bird Day in Maryland? And are there materials that can be created or bought to use at the local level?
So the second part of the question, World Migratory Bird Day does post on their website. They have a shop, an online store, and so you can buy posters and stickers and t-shirts that are the theme of that year, and they have other years as well. And for about $150, you can get everything you need for a World Migratory Bird Day event. So the website does maintain a list of registered events, and they really are generated at the local level. So in Calvert County last year, the Environmental Commission that I volunteer for partnered with several organizations, and in North Beach we held an event and were able to get purchase things from the store and hand those out. So that's really like at the state level, I don't think there is anything, but certainly any group can plan a World Migratory Bird Day event and have it at any scale you would like, whether it's a table somewhere. We had speakers and volunteers all day and bird walks. It was a lot of fun, and I hope we can repeat it at some point. So you can go as small or as big as you like, but yeah, at that local level.
Yeah, and I would just add, yes, to checking in the local level. I know, for instance, Southern Maryland Audubon will be having information at La Plata's Town Festival in the spring. And so you might check with your
Wonderful.
counties and your local communities and towns of what they might have. Here's a good question. What kind of professional installs the dots?
That so it's actually people who install like window film for advertising are can be hired. And if you work with Feather Friendly, they have a list of contractors that are experienced with installing their window films. But you can also call around to advertising, like group companies that will do local advertising. Often they are applying window films on buses or storefronts, and that's really the expertise you need. So if you're doing it professionally, I did our dots on our at home myself, and I didn't do a great job. So certainly you probably want someone doing it professionally on an actual building.
And here's a question. Are there crafts or workshops that folks can do to make things for windows that will help with bird hits? I think this is a great question.
Oh, certainly. I think that's what's exciting about this is that it's a great community or classroom project. Our schools are a great space to promote learning about this issue and to get students involved and or your neighbors. The Acopian bird savers that you mentioned earlier, using the cords and building the what's going to hold them for the window or getting creative with tempera paint or making the bird silhouettes as long as they are properly spaced on the window or other silhouettes, keeping that 2 inch spacing in mind. So I think that you can get as creative as you want with it, um, and especially just kids. Kids get so excited about this, and they really respond to knowing that they're saving birds' lives with projects that are creating things to put on windows.
And I'll just throw one out. One of our local libraries actually lets the kids do paintings on their glass windows that are problematic. And so it does double duty. It helps stop bird hits, and it gets like Joanna just said, gets the kids really excited. And it's also putting their artwork out there for the public.
I love that.
Here's an interesting question. Why exactly are lights bad for birds at night? Do they attract them, disorient them? Are there any lights at night that are good for birds?
So we don't exactly know why lights trigger this response in birds. We just know that it does. There's a mountain of evidence that light is drawing the birds in. So that's not the question, but we understand from studies, Travis Longcore, he is a researcher at UCLA who has tried to figure this out. And he has found that different parts of the spectrum affect different groups of birds differently. Like some really respond to green, some really respond to blue. Unfortunately, regardless of the spectrum of light, birds react to it. So there really isn't any light that we can recommend that is good for birds. It all affects them. The warmer colors that don't have the blue and the white in them, and I say that because LED lighting is more complex in the spectrum than the traditional incandescent lighting. And so you have to be careful. The LED lighting, it might appear warm to us, but it may have the blue and white in it. So you got to pay attention to the labels. Um, but the warmer lighting does overall affect birds less, but it does still affect them. Like those seabirds that I mentioned in the presentation, when they are taking their first flights, it really doesn't spare any. And so keeping the lights, if you're going to have them on, down shielded, pointed to where they need to be, turned off when you don't need them, reducing that light as much as possible is really what we need to do.
Great. And we're getting lots of remarks of thanking you for your great answers on all these questions. And George writes in that we have the parachute cards on our windows. They're easy to do and they're cheap. And I'll second to that. We have them on our windows at home. You can order them online, the size you want. They're very easy to put up and they really do work. And we saw an example of that this weekend when we had some painters at our house who had to take them down to paint the windows. And I was awakened the next morning by loud thuds on the window that I
Oh
hadn't
no.
heard since I put up the Acopian cards. So I got the painters back out there real quick.
Good. Yeah, it's nice to know when you're doing something and it works. So for me, putting up the dots on our windows and no longer finding a cedar waxwing was huge. So yeah, it does pay off and it motivates us to do more. So thanks for what you're doing there.
Well, Joanna, thanks so much for this presentation. I think even those of us who follow this issue learned things that we didn't know about, like cruise ships. Really appreciate your spending your time with us tonight and really appreciate all of you who joined us. It was just a really fabulous turnout. So thank you all so much.